Story time about how my boyfriend found out that I was cheating on him with his best friend. So a little background information. We're gonna call my boyfriend Tyler. Tyler and I had been dating since he was 16 and I was 13. And now it was my freshman year.
Okay guys, I'm not the type to get sick at all. I get sick like once or twice a year. But because I don't get sick, that one time that I do get sick, it's really bad. So this situation happened when I was 13 and it was February. And because you guys don't know this either, for some reason, ever since I was 10 years old, something bad always happens to me the first 3 weeks of February. So like I said, I was 13 when this happened. I was sick and I remember I got up one morning, got ready for school, and my mom took me. When we got to the school, my mom was like, "Are you sure you want to go?" And I was like, "No, to be honest, I really don't want to go to school." So she was just like, "Okay, well, let me go talk to the front lady because they already called me saying that they were going to send you to court if you miss school again." We went inside and my mom was talking to the front lady and she obviously seen that I was sick. So she told my mom, she was like, "Okay, I'll let Stephanie miss one more day, but after that she can't anymore because she's going to get sent to court." And my mom was like, "Okay, thank you. I'll make sure she doesn't miss school anymore." After that, we left the school and my mom had a few things to do, so she was like, "You're just going to come with me." So our first stop was this healthcare place. We walked into the building and there was a lot of people there, so we got into the line. And as I'm standing there, I got really hot. It literally felt like someone put me in an oven, and then my head started hurting. And then about 3 seconds after that happened, I noticed that I was bleeding from the left side of my nose. So I told my mom, "I'll be right back." Okay, so I walk into the public restroom. I grab a piece of paper towel and I'm trying to make the bleeding stop. As I'm trying to do that, I see this lady come out of the bathroom stall with her kid. And she looks at me and I look at her, but like I was bleeding, so I didn't say anything. So then after I looked away, I started bleeding from the right side of my nose. So then at this point, both of my nostrils have so much blood coming out of them. It was like someone turned on a faucet. Like that's how bad it was. And the lady looks at me and we had this conversation in Spanish, but I'm gonna say it in English. She was like, "Are you okay?" I was like, "Yeah, I'm fine. Obviously, I was not fine. And she was like, "No, you're bleeding a lot." So then after that, I was bleeding so much and using so much paper towel that I ran out. So she puts her kid down and she like starts getting all the paper toilet and she's giving it to me. And she's trying to help me stop the bleeding. So then at this point, I was bleeding so much that I felt kind of weak. So then I sat on the floor and then I coughed and then a bunch of blood started coming out of my mouth along with blood clots. And it doesn't sound that graphic to you guys, but it was actually really, really bad. There was so much blood. I had blood all over my face, all of my boots, all over the floor. It was everywhere and the lady was freaking out. I was freaking out. We didn't know what to do. The bleeding wasn't stopping. So then I hear the door open and it's my mom. And she was smiling when she walked in, but when she saw me, her facial expression changed. Like she was horrified. She bent down and she started crying and she was freaking out. My mom was like, "Stephanie, ¿qué está pasando?" And I wouldn't stop bleeding, so she called 911. So my mom was on the phone crying with 911 and the lady was still there trying to help me stop the bleeding. It was usually like the ambulance, the firemen, the police, they take forever to show up, but this time they showed up pretty quick. So when the firemen arrived, I was still bleeding and they walked into the restroom. And I don't remember exactly how they made me stop bleeding, but they did. I also think I stopped bleeding because I just basically coughed everything out. Like everything that needed to come out already came out through my nose and my mouth. So after the firemen helped me stop bleeding, one of them was like, "Okay, let's get out of here because there's a lot of blood here." And this was the most embarrassing part, at least for me. So there was a lot of people there, and when I walked out, everybody looked at me like, "What the hell happened to her?" I wouldn't care if it was like 3 people looking at me, but everybody in the room was staring, and there was like at least 50 people there. And I was just like, "Oh my god, this is so embarrassing." Like everybody was looking. It was obviously the people who worked there knew what was going on, so they ended up closing off the restroom to clean off all the blood, and then me and the firemen ended up staying in the back room. So then they told me and my mom like they can drive us to the hospital, they can call an ambulance, or we go by ourselves. And my mom was like, "We'll just go on our own." So I arrived to the hospital and they put me in a room and they ended up giving me some pills. I don't know what they were, but they gave me a few and it was supposedly to stop the bleeding. And they ended up telling me and my mom that I was going to stay for a few hours to make sure that the bleeding doesn't come back. So I would have stayed there for who knows how long, but I ended up lying. So the nurses were like checking up on me every now and then. And at one point she came into the room and she was like, "Have you felt any blood clots coming up?" Y pues I said, "No, I'm perfectly fine." But I lied because I felt the blood clots trying to come up a few minutes before she even came into the room. So then after that, she believed me and she released us. I never found out what it was, by the way. They were just like, "Here, take these pills." And then my mom found out that I lied, so she got really mad at me. It was stupid for me to lie, but I mean, I was 13. At the time, I was like, I went through a traumatic experience. I just want to go home and go to sleep. Y pues after that, I was pale for like 2 or 3 days because I did lose a lot of blood. And as for the lady that helped me, I see her as a little angel to this day because she didn't need to help me. She could have just walked away and be like, "Oh, fuck you." But instead, she stopped what she was doing and she came and helped me. So if you ever see this, thank you.
guys want to talk about the worst mom in the history of moms, let's talk about the case of Diane Downs, who literally attempted to murder all 3 of her children in order to get a man to fall in love with her. So what exactly creates a monster like this? Well, Diane was born August 7th of 1955 in Phoenix, Arizona. Most of her life, she was pretty well behaved, but she started to rebel against her parents around high school. She cut her hair, had a really edgy phase, and got super boy crazy. And she started to date guys, which was way outside of her strict family's rules. And she fell in love with a boy named Steve Downs. They were high school sweethearts, but the second that college hit, they ended up going separate ways. He joined the Navy, and she went to Pacific Coast Baptist Bible College. And while they said that they would stay faithful to each other, she immediately started to hook up with other guys when she got there, and was expelled for her promiscuous behavior, and had to go back and live with her strict parents. While Steve came back, he forgave her, and they ended up running away together and getting married on November 13th of 1973. They were known to fight constantly, but in 1974, they had their first child together, making Part 2 to the Diane Downs case. Well, the marriage between her and Steve was beyond rocky, and having their first daughter together, Christy, did not help that improve. And 6 months after she was born, Diane ended up leaving Christy with her dad so she could join the Navy, which only lasted 3 weeks because she had to leave for severe blisters. They had another kid in 1976 named Cheryl, and Steve had a vasectomy immediately after this, but then Diane was pregnant again. So I guess you can imagine how that happened. She did not go through with the pregnancy, but her and Steve stayed together. Later, they moved to Mesa, Arizona, got new jobs, and Diane was having affairs with all of her new co-workers. Got pregnant again, kept this one, and had a boy named Danny. Steve actually still decided to stay for the sake of the kids, and wanted to remain a father figure to Danny. But eventually they ended up getting divorced in 1980, and this is when things got significantly more unstable. Diane started to bounce from relationship to relationship, moving in and out with different men, and then decided to become a surrogate in order to make money, even though she didn't pass all the psychiatric exams. Terrifying. But everything changed when she met a man named Nick. Part 3 to the Diane Downs case. So this is when Diane met Robert Nickenbacker, who went by the name Nick. And she swore that this man was the love of her life. He had separated from his wife and describes the relationship as being intense and overwhelming. He eventually broke it off with her though because he didn't like kids. And this is when Diane became devastated and angry at her own children for getting in the way of her love. Her kids and her moved to Cottage Grove, Oregon, but still couldn't seem to forget Nick. She would obsessively write to him, and she really stopped paying attention to her kids' health. They often went hungry, went without coats in the cold. It was even said by a neighbor that Cheryl had mentioned that she was scared of her mom. Well, on Thursday, May 19th of 1983, everything went down. This story is from her perspective, by the way. They were coming home from a friend's house whenever Diane decided to take the kids on a scenic route. They did this often to explore. Hungry Like the Wolf started to play on the radio, and this is when she noticed a bushy-haired stranger signaling her over from the middle of the road. And at 10 p.m., with her kids asleep in the back of the car, she got out to talk to him, and he immediately demanded for her keys. Part 4 to the Diane Downs case. So immediately after this stranger demanded for her keys, they had some sort of a struggle, in which he shoots all 3 of her kids and then shoots her in the left arm. In order to distract him, she pretends to throw her keys in the bush, and then uses the keys that are actually in her hand to turn on the car and then drive wildly like a lunatic to the hospital. So she pulls up to this hospital with her kids in bad condition, and all of the medical professionals that were there that night were shocked by her reactions. Her daughter Cheryl ended up passing away, and Danny and Christy were literally clinging to life. And she showed no emotion at all. Not only had she wrapped her own gun wound and not her kids', but she was worried about her new car having blood on it. She seemed relieved that Cheryl was dead, and was shocked when she found out that Danny, her 3-year-old child, had been paralyzed. And she was only shocked because he wasn't hit in the heart. Christy had had a stroke, but she was still alive, so currently Diane was the only witness. And a lot of moms actually felt for her during this time, and were even scared to leave with this man on the loose. But the public opinion didn't last for long. Part 5 to the Diane Downs case. Even though the police were already suspicious of Diane, because she was the only witness, they had to rule out her story. So they got a composite sketch of the guy, and they ended up searching the whole area, where they only found some bullet casings. And her interviews during this time, if you guys have ever seen them, are so weird, definitely worth watching. This woman was eating up the attention so much, and she made the story into this whole overcoming thing where, like, she battled the patriarchy, ended up actually getting away from this man, like she's kind of the hero in the situation, but didn't show any emotion towards her kids. She went on the Oprah show and would crack jokes and have the crowd laughing. So the police ended up asking her to do a reenactment of this event. And it's truly one of the weirdest videos that you will ever see, because she seems like she's having fun. Any mom being put through this would have found this to be extremely traumatic to relive this event. Instead, she's having fun, smirking, checking herself out in the car mirror, ends up hitting her arm on the steering wheel and says, "That almost hurt as bad as when," and cuts herself off. And it seems like she was about to say, "as when I shot my Part 6 to the Diane Downs case. So after seeing this horrific reenactment, people just flat out are not believing her anymore, especially whenever she said this whole thing took place in like 5 to 10 seconds. And she did not take the criticism very well, literally stating, if I had shot my own children, wouldn't I have done a good job of it? She's literally gaslighting people who are letting her know that things aren't adding up. Back at the hospital, Christy is starting to improve a lot, but she's still nonverbal. Her mom ends up coming to visit her actually, and her heart spikes. So the police are starting to want to have her as a witness, and they immediately get her in with a therapist. They practice by her writing down the shooter on a piece of paper and her throwing it into a fire, until eventually she feels safe enough to give it to the therapist. And once she did, it said her mom. The police went to go check Diane's house, found bullet casings that matched those at the crime scene, and also found a diary with intros about Robert, and talking about how Robert doesn't want kids. So then the police had their motive. Which Oprah even brought up to her that the man was now afraid of her because he thought she had shot her own kids. She tried to change her story a few more times, but she ended up getting
on Zoom. I wanted to go to sleep, honestly, because like when I'm tired, I go to sleep. I end up falling asleep and then class ends and everyone starts leaving the class. Except me, because I was like in a whole other universe at this point. I was dreaming, I was flying.
So when I was in elementary, my mom, sister, and I all lived with my dad in Hawaii. And at the time, everything was going great. My sister was in school and my mom was going to enroll me in school the next year. So anyways, this one particular day, I walked into my parents' room and I seen that my mom was laying down on her bed crying. So obviously, I asked her what was wrong. And she said, your dad broke my heart. And I was little, so my dumbass didn't know what that meant. When she said that at the time, I thought that my dad literally physically broke her heart. After that, my mom and my dad split up. And as I got older, I began wondering why they weren't together anymore. So I ended up asking my mom one day why she wasn't with my dad anymore. And this is where the chisme starts. She began telling me that not long after we moved in, she started noticing that my dad was acting different with my mom. She said that my dad was always friendly with other women. So obviously she had her superstitions. And one morning, while my dad was in the shower getting ready for work, she decided to look through his phone. As soon as my mom grabbed his phone, a random number began calling him. That's when my mom answered the phone and a woman picked up. She then heard the woman say, "Good morning, my love. Did you sleep well?" After my mom heard the lady say that, she was like, "Who the fuck are you?" The lady realized who she was talking to and she hung up the phone. My mom was furious at this point and she ended up walking into the bathroom and she started yelling at my dad while he was taking a shower. She tells him everything that just happened and he ends up telling my mom that the woman means nothing to him and that he will supposedly stop talking to her. Fast forward a bit, and it took my mom a long time to forgive my dad, but she finally came around. After my mom forgave my dad, a few months passed by again. And of course, my mom started noticing that my dad began acting weird again. He would especially act weird late at night. One of those nights, I remember my mom grabbed my sister and me and she put us into the car and we started driving somewhere. We ended up pulling into this motel where my dad's truck was. And just so you guys know, we lived in a small city, so there was only one motel in that entire city. So like I said, we pulled into this motel, my mom parks the car, and then she gets out. She walks to one specific door and she started banging on their door. The door opens and it ends up being my dad. And of course, right away, my dad starts apologizing to my mom. My mom then walked into the room. My dad opened the door and started apologizing to my mom. But it didn't work and my mom walked into the room. She sees a woman there and realizes that it's the same woman who called my dad a few months ago on his phone. After that, my mom started beating her up and my dad ended up pulling my mom off of her. My mom then tells my dad, "You either choose me or you choose her." My dad looks at my mom and he was like, "I choose her." After that, my mom started to break down into tears and she started hating my dad. My dad then tried to give her a hug, but my mom ended up punching him in the nose and took his wallet. After that, my mom left and drove me and my sister home, and once we got there, my mom started to pack all of our clothes into suitcases and bought next day tickets to go back to our hometown in Texas. And we left that night a few hours after everything happened. My mom hasn't seen my dad since that day. And my dad ended up marrying that lady. So she is now my stepmom, and whenever I go to my dad's for the summer, I don't hide the fact that I don't like her. And of course, I don't like her because she knew my dad was with my mom, but still continued to see him. She ruined our family, and I know that my dad was also to blame, but I mean, can you really blame me for hating her?